I'll officially call the Parks and Rec Special Revenue Fund Analysis Work Group to order on this rainy October 28th morning. I don't believe we have any public audience. There's nobody on the phone, and I didn't receive any correspondence. Maria, Melissa, Amy, nothing from you guys?
No.
Okay. We all have the minutes from October 6th. If there's no recommended changes, updates, or otherwise, we'll consider those to stand.
Can I make a couple comments on those minutes?
Sure.
I don't know if it has to be changed, but I just want to clarify that it said that I was okay with $266,000 as a. I actually don't have them in front of me. Keep in mind that I'm working from a campground right now, but I just want to be clear that what I was saying was yes, I was okay with that amount, assuming it was, offset by cuts in the Board of Selectmen budget and feathered in over time. And that part was not made clear in the minutes. And I think there's also an issue about the use of the word that there was consensus on the amount that was going to be addressed and what was going to be moved. And I'm not sure that there was consensus about that. I know I just sort of kept quiet when we got to the point of talking about how much, what items and what positions to move, because I felt like I had talked so much during that meeting, but it wasn't voted on, and other people were just quiet, like Art and Chris, and so I'm not sure that.
Linda, this is Art. This is Art.
Oh, hi, Art.
Hi. It's a judgment call, close to consensus. Well, I don't know. They may have been, but I wasn't there. So I would say the group discussed it, or something like that. The point was raised, but I'm not sure how you determine that you're close to consensus without taking a vote. And I certainly was not comfortable with it.
I use the words close to consensus because based on who's been speaking, I counted my votes in my head, but so consensus means I had enough to pass. But we can debate that, or those were my words, and they're attributed to me.
Okay, so since we've made the point now, that's fine. But I just wanted to clarify where I was.
Yep. And candidly, that's the tactic to move this forward. Is we're not all going to agree on the number. We all have a different number in our head, but consensus is that we're going to fix this problem. And if it's 275 or 266 or 290, I really hope that we don't haggle about that when we vote. But that's up to each of you as you cast your vote when we try to move this.
Sean, I look at it the same way. I hope we follow the former, which is consensus around the vehicle and approach. The number we're probably not going to agree on, but I think it's the spirit of the approach.
Correct.
All right.
Okay.
But Linda, your points are noted, and again, I think we can have the minutes. I think we've captured that your intent was not to just blindly agree to the 266 without the offsetting. That was certainly part of the discussion.
Yeah, Linda, I can add those two pieces that you noted, just that you were comfortable with that number as long as it was feathered in over time and is offset by cuts. I can do that.
Yep. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Any other changes to the minutes?
Nope.
Is there a motion to approve with the amended request, as Linda has stated?
Approved.
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, we'll move on to the analysis and discussion. So staff has prepared, the team has prepared a bunch of information for us. Maria, I don't know how you want to kick that off and go through the packet information, or Amy.
Sure. Maybe it would be helpful if we have Melissa pull up the packet materials and we can work through some of the documents that we provided in response to some of the information requests that we had.
And let me just make the point that I can't see anything that you're doing, so just make sure you talk about it and not just show it.
Sure.
Linda, have you had access to the packet previously?
Yes, I have the packet, but I don't have anything new that you do.
Yeah, so all they're bringing up is the packet information.
Okay.
Which goes through, and I think it was the core of some of your questions, right? Of how are the fees determined what level of review is done, the comparative analysis.
Yeah, I've read it all. Yeah.
Yep.
I have
So,
a whole bunch of questions.
do you want to just skip to those questions versus getting a presentation on it?
Unless Amy wants to, or Maria wants to tee it up in some way, sure.
I mean, I'll quickly start that again. The Board of Selectmen has empowered and through the process, Tom Tyberski and his team, along with Culture Parks and Rec, do what I think is a pretty thorough analysis several times a year of both the winter and then the summer fees. We put them through. They put themselves through back to Jerry Toner's days, and I think Tom has done a great job of picking that up and improving it further of an in-depth comparative analysis on who we compete with, looking at towns and private facilities, fees, et cetera. And it's certainly no perfect science, but they and Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys spend a lot of your time throughout the year on this very topic.
No, absolutely. Especially with the comparative analysis of whether it's golf courses, ice rinks. Tom's and again, his predecessor, Jerry, did a very good job. We also had then Jerry Wetchen will often go through and do some additional financial analysis as to, gee, if 50 cents here or 50 cents there, what does that mean on the revenue side? And also keeping an eye on, okay, gee, we have increased expenses. Therefore, regardless of what the competition may be doing, we have to raise rates a certain amount to essentially try to balance as best we can the budget.
Hey, Dave, it's Chris. Can Linda, Art, I joined the P&R as a liaison, 3-4 years ago. This sentence, it feels like, no, just kidding, guys. And if I remember, sort of at the time, Dave, of the transition from Jerry to Tom, the watching, not having input, but just being an observer around the rink fee increases, or the related associated ice skating costs, whether they were the daily costs, the camp, or whichever. Am I mistaken that it had seemed as if for a period of time, say the 3 years prior to 2018, that there really hadn't been much consideration around raising the costs of various associated ice activities, and you guys were essentially making your first concerted increases after having held the rates for a number of years? Is that a correct recollection? That each year we hadn't made incremental small rates. It wasn't something we hadn't applied, let's say, a simplistic COLA increase each year of 0.1% or 5%. You guys had kept them frozen, and Tom really started to look at it and started to move those rink costs up for the first time in a number of years. Is that a correct recollection, or am I just spouting off?
Well, with age, memory fades there, Chris. But I think generally you are correct. Jerry, if you had any input, you can certainly pipe in. But I think generally you were correct. We felt like with the ice rink, we looked at that and said, all right, a big portion of the money comes in from established groups. We wanted to keep those established groups. We had some aging problems of the rink, so it was on a competitive level. We weren't really kind of even with ISCC. But yes, since Tom has gotten there, we have taken a look at doing incremental increases based on cost of living adjustment, increased energy costs, things of that nature.
Yeah, Dave, most of the time what we did was when we looked at the rates, we looked at our direct costs. We didn't look at our indirect costs at all. So there were years where our direct costs were not going up, so we didn't feel it was appropriate to pass along rate increases to create a profitability as opposed to covering the costs.
Agreed.
So can I chime in? I'm looking at the chart of when fee increases occurred, and yes, a bunch did occur in 2017 on the rinks and some in 2016. and a couple on 2015, but not almost none since then. And we're talking about trying to increase rates starting next July. So it's almost a year from, 3/4 of a year from now. So it will have been like 5 years since rates went up. And meanwhile, minimum wage is steadily going up every year under the state law. So costs are going up. And if you're only looking at comparisons to other rinks as of now for what your rates are going to be a year from now, you're kind of looking a little bit in the rearview mirror. And so I was sort of surprised to see Tom's memo saying, no, we can't raise any rates, even though minimum wage is going to go up, and probably everybody's going to raise their rates to reflect that because their costs are going up. So I would just ask again that you think about raising rates, because having talked to a couple people on the Board of Finance to sort of take their temperature on some of these issues, it behooves us to put that on the table as an option to help fund.
Linda, there's no argument from a standpoint with our public skating and stuff like that we're going to have to raise rates. The difficulty is we're going to be talking about this almost a year from now. And when we talk about that, we're already going to have the 21-22 budget passed before we even get into that rate discussion. So it's awfully difficult to foresee the effects of COVID or whatever, other than the fact we know we're going to have our increases in our minimum wage.
Right, but
we also
that part
see
is predictable.
Significant reductions in expenses coming forward.
So
why?
Our energy costs are going to go down significantly.
Oh, I didn't. How come?
We're changing over to LED lighting.
Oh.
The full effect of the solar panels, as well as the natural gas line that we installed. We see those already, but we don't know what the full effect will be for the next budget cycle.
So can I just respond, Linda? This is Tom Tyversky. The biggest drivers for in the increased costs with minimum wage are the public skate and the learn to skate classes. Those are the ones that are most affected by those rate increases. Those are the places where we have increased the fees this year, significantly so this year. And you get to the point where we're here to deliver, and I'm philosophizing here. We're here to deliver a service. At some point, if we're not able to deliver that service effectively to the people, or make it affordable for them to have the service, then should we be offering the service? I mean, we get to the point where we may say, without help here, if we offer a public skate for $10 a session and no one comes, what's the point? Or same thing with our skating lessons, which are very effective. It takes a year, when minimum wage went through, it takes about a year for us to get back to that budget number. This year we raised that learn to skate $5. And we also, in addition to that, we cut off the staff time that would be affected. We're not offering the extra half hour, those kind of things. So, effectively we did it by raising that learn to skate fee $5 over, we raised it in 19 when the minimum wage started going up. By raising it $5 times, 300 kids that may come through skating, that's a significant increase in revenue. And $5 on a session, on a 6-week session is fairly good when you're considering you have one staff member to probably 8 to 10 kids in a lesson. That extra $50 more than covers any 50 cent or $1 increase we had in minimum wage at that time.
So
but
guys,
at this point,
let me jump in. Sorry, let me jump in, guys. This is an important philosophical discussion, but what's getting lost here is that the rates this season are set already, Linda.
I know that for this. I'm talking about for the next budget season.
Correct. So
I mean, this is all about the next budget. So
right.
I guess, guys, I guess I got you. Chris, I know we got limits. I got you spiraled down a rabbit hole. I guess what I didn't well form my point was that, Linda, the very difficult conversation around rate increase has been occurring. As far as I've been observing, it was not regularly something that was point of mind that everybody wanted to take up. Since I've been observing the organization, the leadership group, and since Tom has come on, I just want to make sure that you guys know that Tom, Jerry, Dave, and the rest of the committee have been have taken the issue of rate increases very seriously, and understand it's a difficult conversation, but it's probably the very first thing that they're considering to try to help us close this gap.
Okay.
The net is they are not resistant to increasing costs regularly and in a scheduled basis. They are just trying to make sure that we don't price ourselves out of the effective net result. That's what I just wanted to say.
That is 100% correct.
I've observed that. And so that's just what I should have said initially. I apologize. Yeah. So we can hopefully move forward to an action on that point.
And I appreciate that, and I'm not disputing it in any way. I'm just trying to reflect to you that others on the Board of Finance are going to be less sympathetic if there isn't some indication that as the costs of minimum wage go up, et cetera, that gets reflected in an increase in the fees.
So, Linda, what I can say to you is that the Board of Selectmen will continue to do its charter job, which is we will approve rates commensurate with the facility, with the recommendation, with the economic conditions. We can't tell you right now what that's going to be because I don't get the presentation on these rates for some time.
Right.
So you got to hold me accountable and you got to trust us.
Sean, if I could, these two discussions get at my perspective, which I guess is a macro perspective. That, I mean, clearly a lot of work has been gone into this. These are good programs. The town cares about them, and I like the proposals made. I mean, it's well done, and there's a lot of attention to the fees. I've got that, and I also get your point, Sean, which is that the Board of Selectmen are going to have to fit this in and take a look at it. My frustration is that looking back from Board of Finance, we probably have a 200,000, 2% roughly guidance, and we're throwing on 128,000 extra. And I find it very difficult to do the micro work of assessing a great program compared to everything else. And I'm not comfortable saying, well, before we get to the rest of the budget, we'll say that this one can exceed its limit, because I expect we're going to get an awful lot of them that exceed its limit. And it brings it back to the Board of Selectmen. Okay, you got a great program here that the town likes. What is your role? Do you want to offset this increase with cuts elsewhere? If so, that makes a big difference. If not, then clearly we have a problem with exceeding $200,000. That's just my perspective at it.
So if you're looking for the Board of Selectmen to fill in the hole by themselves, that wasn't what we talked about last time, and that's not possible without cutting core services elsewhere. So we can be in the position, if the Board of Finance wants us to cut services, and we can say, fine, we'll shut down the ice rink, or we'll fire 2 plow drivers. We've never been in that position, and I would ask that we not be put in that position, because I don't think that's what this town wants. But if the Board of Finance wants to arbitrarily hit a guideline of numbers without the real perspective on the town, we can do that.
I think that's Art's point, is that when we have a tri-board meeting, whatever the guidance is that comes out, which is typically 2% or less, that, that's the guidance. And it is, the Board of Finance, and I'm not speaking for myself, I'm speaking also for the other people I've spoken to on the Board of Finance. They don't have an appetite to say, all right, well, we'll give you a 10 or 14% increase in Parks and Rec, but not in any other part of the town budget. The guidance is going to be the guidance, and it's going to be. And I will tell you, I did not get a warm reception when I tried to advocate for changing the collection rate, which I was willing to do, but I can't say that I can guarantee I can bring along my colleagues on the Board of Finance on that one.
Yeah, we're going to get into a policy discussion here, and I don't want it to devolve too much further, but the Board of Selectmen's job through its subcommittees is to present to you the maintenance and running of the town. The Board of Finance's job is to decide whether we should and how to pay for it. And ultimately, if we're not in alignment, then the Board of Finance has line item authority to force us to make those changes. And I don't want to preemptively do them today in October when we don't know what the guidance is.
Right.
We don't know what the costs are. And again, part of my frustration, I'll be honest with you, Linda, and this is an airing of the grievances, is the Board of Finance, I don't think, has truly appreciated the actual cost of increase that we've come to you and shared with when setting that number. I think the number has come out of the air in the past, and less so based on fact, more so based on opinion. And if we're going to continue to budget based off opinion versus fact, then we're going to continue to, I think, have a substantial delta. Example, if our cost of services go up 2.5% and we get a 2% guidance without cutting police officers and plow drivers, that 2% is impossible. So if we can continue to do this dance year in and year out, this isn't the meeting for it. And I appreciate the concerns, but there's a timing and a flow to all of this. And the 6 of us and the 6 of you guys have to come up with a solution that works, that manages the town and funds it properly by the time we send it to referendum.
Well, I just have to say, I think you don't want to be suggesting that the Board of Finance is just using opinion. That's not at all fair. You know,
2
we
years
do
ago,
a
you
lot
guys
of
changed
looking.
the number without fact. So,
all right, let's not debate this here, but that is utterly not true. There's a lot that goes into our thinking about, what's going on, just in the same way that the whole argument about how you set rates for skating so that you're comparable to other towns is a big part of what drives us. You can't just take all costs and say, whatever we spend, we'll just raise taxes to fund it, because then our tax rate, we have to represent the taxpayer. And the taxpayers do come to us and complain a lot about how our taxes are higher than other towns. So it is our responsibility to not just fund any and all expenses if they exceed what's affordable relative to other towns.
yeah, and
again, don't want to belabor that.
I'm not suggesting it's anything personal, but the Board of Selectmen through the town manager gave you a projection last year at the tri-board meeting. You guys gave us 2%. We ended up at 0.1% off from what the Board of Selectmen gave you as a projection for what the cost structure was going to look like. So it's a philosophical argument, but there is fact behind what we send you. So we can debate that at the tri-board.
I don't dispute that. I know there's fact behind what you send us. And there's fact behind what we send you. So let's move on.
Yep. So we've talked about the rates. Can I at least, dare I use the word consensus, that I expect and demand and will be held accountable for the rates that I set as a Board of Selectmen member, and that the Board of Finance has got to trust us at this point to continue to take this conversation in mind with it. We're trying to move rates in line with costs, and that minimum wage, Linda, your point is absolutely right. Minimum wage and others need to continue to be factored in when we set those rates. Is that fair, Art, Linda, for
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
what you guys are getting at?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Linda, you had additional questions?
Yeah, and I could go over some of these with Amy. I didn't have a chance yesterday, but some of the numbers seem to have. I have different sets of numbers depending upon when I got them. Let me turn to the right page. So, when Amy and I talked previously, she had said that she thought the impact of minimum wage was going to be $75,000, but in this package, it shows as $37,000. And previously, when she and I talked, she said the pension impact was going to be $40,000, and in this package, it's $20,000. So I'm confused by those numbers. And Amy, I don't know if you know off the top of your head what would account for those differences.
That was actually one of the discussions at the last meeting where we were told to go back and solidify those numbers, because there was a discrepancy where $200,000 came from, but then at the meeting it was reported as a different number. And so that was part of the direction from the last meetings, to go back and solidify those numbers.
All right. So, and then I just wondered, the year of 2019, when you look across, I'm sorry, it's difficult to work here in a campground. The first chart there that I'm trying to reopen my computer because it doesn't stay on. The chart where you showed the average of all of the costs. Here it is, at 307,953. That's the year 2019 has a tremendous glob of money in there for additional year-end appropriations, and I think that's an accounting change because as you have said before, it's not what I remember voting on. Is that I don't know what the accounting change was, so I don't know if that's a fair number to include in the average. Can you just address that?
Yeah, so that was the accounting change. If you give me a minute, you guys can discuss, and I can give you the number without the accounting change.
Yeah, because that would significantly change the average, right?
I don't know if it would be that significant, but before I say that, let me run the number.
Okay, while you're doing that, I'll ask one more question, and that is, so even assuming the 307,000 from this chart is what we want, on the very next page, instead of using 307,000 as the problem that needs to be fixed, in scenario 2, we're going to move 514,000. So that's $200,000, $207,000 more than would be necessary to fix the average problem. And so I have an issue with why do that extra 200,000? I mean, that's it appears to me to be more than is necessary. I mean, if there are in subsequent years bad years because of weather or whatever, that's what we have a general revenue fund for, is to bail out, and in other years you'll have a good year. But if the average is 307, why are we solving for more than that? That's going to wind up with with the Parks and Recs, with the Simsbury Farms Fund having its own little slush fund to work from, and that's not something we necessarily want every single department to have their own slush fund.
So Linda, I got to take exception to the word slush fund again. They don't have the authority to spend that money without appropriation through the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance. So there is no slush fund.
Well, but it would be an excess of what they need,
but
particularly in the early years.
A slush fund implies that Tom can arbitrarily spend it. He cannot.
Well, not necessarily. No,
yeah,
that's not what I mean.
I think what Linda may be saying is, maybe I'll massage that message, is that we just don't want there to be an expectation every year that there's going to be this buffer or this soft landing that can always be found. So it's
Right.
I think I know what Linda's. We don't want to create the culture of that thought process.
Can I jump in quickly, Sean?
Yeah.
Just, I think 2 points that would be, important to add is that, ideally, if we're going to continue to operate in a special revenue fund, we would want to have a fund balance, not a slush fund, but a fund balance. And I think, when you look at
what I meant to.
Yeah, and in part, Linda, right, that's to weather, no pun intended, the bad weather. So, the golf course, if we have an extremely rainy season, the rink, if we have a warm season, pool season, if we have a lot of rain, they're all outdoor facilities, and it's very hard to predict the weather. So again, like a good healthy fund balance helps in those years where we have maybe some unexpected revenue loss due to the weather. But kind of going back to closing the gap, I think that the larger question that this group was really tasked with was not just about closing the gap, but there's this equity issue, right, that we've uncovered, and that we've been asking participants through their user fees to subsidize community expenditures to maintain the facility that we don't ask of any other group in town. And so really, I think that's the heart of what, in part, we were trying to solve, is this equity issue, right? There is that issue of closing the gap, but then there's also this equity issue that I think has been lost a little bit in some of the conversation.
Agreed.
And I'm glad you said that, Maria, because I think one problem we have is that different members of this committee define the problem that we're trying to solve in different ways. From a board of finance perspective, the problem we're trying to solve is how do we close the gap so that we're not doing year-end transfers each year. Recognizing that in bad weather years or when there are extraordinary conditions, you will do that. That's what the general revenue fund is for. But on average, how do you make it be so that, appropriately funded up front? Whereas I think what you're looking for and the commission members are looking for is that equity issue. And I don't want to dispute whether that's good or bad, but I can just tell you that that's not particularly in this year what the Board of Finance members are going to be trying to resolve. And I don't know, quite frankly, that the rest of the Board of Selectmen will be happy to say, yeah, sure, throw an extra $200,000 into our budget for us to figure out how to pay, because again, back to our earlier conversation, the guidance from the Board of Finance is not going to say, oh, sure, well, geez, you took on an extra $200,000, so we'll make your percentage larger. I mean, even if I wanted to do that, I know the rest of them aren't going to. So I think you're setting yourself up for a very difficult budget year if you do that.
And part of the point of this,
I would circumscribe
was that we would have consensus that, and again, it's up to the Board of Finance to either include this number or not include this number. But again, if this number is inclusive in the guidance, then I would question our ability to do this. And honestly, why are we even here? Because this is not contemplated in our wage increases, et cetera. There are expenditures that the town has coming independent of this. So if the guidance doesn't contemplate this, we're going to be right back here again.
For the fourth time.
Yeah, and absolutely agree on that as well. That the equity issue has to be part of the discussion. I would hope the Board of Finance would, in their discussion, consider that has to be part of what we're trying to resolve here. And although it's a hard pill to swallow in 1 year, again, maybe we come up with ways to do it over time. But that clearly needs to be part of the consideration, at least in the opinion of those of us over here at Park and Rec.
It's a serious issue, and I think people.
Yeah, if this is Chris, Linda, I think what you said is a fair point that everybody's aligned. Just so that you guys know where I am, as I'm on the record. My approach to this is that this becomes it's unfortunate, but the way I'm going to look at it, this becomes a hard cost that is solved by the taxpayer. We shift this over. It's part of our budget. There is still going forward. There is still an allowance, an occurrence, a philosophy that allows for the anomaly years to be borne by the general fund for whatever the was. But we have to get out of this being the every year occurrence, because that's just not the proper way to manage cash. I hope we all agree. That's why we're here. So my position is that this does become something that has to be considered as part of the budget, and that we have to take that as part of the macro increase and solve for it, whether it's through a tax or whatever it may be. But I think additionally, it goes, in my mind, it goes through, if possible, it gets solved for in a phased approach. But that is my intent. So you guys all know that I unfortunately look at this as something that has to be taken up by the taxpayers as part of our budget. Whether that means an increase or a decrease, I don't know. But that's where it moves to. And then, if possible, it's about a service cut at the facility. That's not off the table for certain as well. Just so you guys know where I am, and everybody who's there's this clarity around my thought process.
The solution, and it's not a digestible solution, is to cut the services, close the facility, and what kind of reaction are you going to get from the taxpayers then?
Jerry, fair point. No, Chris, hold on a second. Chris, we have to have some order here. Art was trying to speak previously.
Yeah, Chris, along with that position, would you favor cuts elsewhere or a tax increase?
I thank you for putting me on your spot. It is no. So my absolute is not that we just deal with this by increasing the taxes. No, not whatsoever. But that's where we land. That's where it essentially lands immediately in my philosophy, right? The first answer is to increase taxes. That's not what I want. I'm just saying from a functional standpoint, I think this needs to become part of the budget, the annual operating budget that is addressed to revenues that are raised via taxes. Then we can look at just to move the efforts of this committee. Pardon me, I'm not raising I'm moving away from the phone. Just to move the efforts to so that there's a result of the efforts of this committee. That's my approach, and so that we don't just leave this committee by not really having done anything. That's my first action. Thereafter, Art, good question. I am not at all, and Jerry, I am not at all averse to saying, well, the taxpayers are going to revolt. We're going to have pitchforks and torches, and we need to cut something. I don't know which group is larger. The people that who will turn on me because they're the core taxpayers who don't use a facility, or the people who lose out because we make a very hard decision to reduce some source. I don't know which the answer is, but neither of them are off the table. I just want to move it functionally. I want there to be a result from the good, hard efforts of everybody, which is it's a very discomfort. This is an uncomfortable conversation, but we've got to make uncomfortable decisions at some point. I'll stop there.
I believe that was Linda's point, and rightfully so at the last meeting, that if everybody's willing to give a bit here, the answer is in there, right, Linda? And again, I don't know what we're essentially debating the percentages, right? And that's really important work. But I think we and again, I don't want to speak for anybody. We have agreement at a macro level that all three bodies are trying to contribute to solve this problem. Is that fair, everybody? Nobody's drawn the line saying, no, I'm not helping here. The Board of Selectmen, certainly, as much as Chris and I are empowered to steer that I think, Linda, you and Art have indicated you're willing to, and I know Dave and Jerry have talked again about rates, and again, there's a process in place there. So I think everybody is still moving towards the right direction. Linda, you pointed out earlier, we're haggling between $200,000 here. In the interest of trying to move us forward, I'm willing to move forward at the lower number with the understanding that if we're wrong, we're going to have to fix it at the end of the year again. And if everybody's okay with that, I'm okay with that. But what I don't want is the Board of Finance to publicly lash us all again for coming in short if we didn't solve the problem.
So what do you mean by the lower number? Because as the minutes said, we sort of agreed on 266,000, which looks like now it's 307,000. But so, maybe changes once Amy gets back to us with her number. Or are you talking about the 514,000?
I was talking about, I believe what was I at last time? Yours was the 266, and then I believe I was advocating for the higher number because of shifting the costs. So solving what is presented to us as both the shortfall and the inequity or administrative challenge or whatever we want to call it of somebody's salary being in the wrong line item. If we want to just lump
so you're looking at you're looking at 514. Sorry,
I am, because again, my endeavor was to solve the entirety of the problem. If we want to break it up into two chunks, again, in the interest of moving forward and getting progress, I'll be willing to do it, but we all have to do it together.
Well, I would suggest, frankly, that I'm not sure that the six of us can reach that agreement, but four of you certainly can, because that's quite clear. And I have to reflect not only my own thoughts but also those of my colleagues on the Board of Finance, and I know that they are not as comfortable as I am, even at the lower number. So I can't really say that yes, the Board of Finance will go along with the 514,000. I just know that's not going to happen.
No,
so I would suggest the four of you vote as a majority to move forward with whatever you want, and you guys present it in the context of the greater budget, and the Board of Finance is going to do what it's going to do. I can't force them to do something. I mean, I'm only one vote there.
No, and
Linda,
hold on, Chris. Chris, hold on. Not asking you to force anybody, but again, the idea was that we would try to have a unified recommendation, and the 6 of us would do our best to advocate back to our boards. Again, understanding we could all get outvoted, but if you and Art aren't even in the same realm of this, then this group hasn't done their work. Because
I think
majority rule.
Think we were, yeah, I think we were okay with, and I'm maybe speaking out of turn for Art, but at least I was okay with trying to advocate for something in the realm of the 266,000,
right?
Or whatever that number became once Amy redid the work. But I'm not comfortable advocating for more because I've already tried and know I know what the reaction's going to be.
If I could just interject for a second, from a Parks and Rec perspective, and I think we have consensus, Dave, Tom, and our board, is that if you just throw everything back in the general fund, exclusive of the golf course, then both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance have to work out their numbers as to how it's going to be palatable to the voters. It solves our issue from a standpoint. We're going to do our best to produce as much revenue as we can. However, do we continually subsidize the taxpayers? Whereas if it's back in the general fund, we're not.
Yeah, so we've got a challenge of the philosophies, the funding gap, some assumptions, some weather. We've got a lot of factors here, and I think everybody's coming from a good place, and I appreciate that. But we're also in the reality.
Would it be, Linda? Maybe I'm just maybe I'm just slow in the uptake here, which I've been claimed before. But maybe you'd be helpful. Could you give me what you believe? Purely could be your speculation, but just the tone and tenor of your associates on the Board of Finance. What is the preferred direction? I don't know if it's possible to say forget the number, whether it's 260, 350, 500, $1 million. But if you took the number out of the equation, how do they feel we should actually be addressing this situation? What is the tenor of the Board of Finance? Is it it should be in the general fund? It should be the way it is, or it should be a tax increase, or should we just cut the service to make sure that you guys are just cost neutral? So that could help us. It doesn't put. I'm not asking. It's just what so I know what I'm working up against or working with.
I think that's a good question, Chris. And I haven't spoken to everybody on the Board of Finance, but of those I've spoken to, the tenor is that this is a terrible year, that COVID is going to be, very disastrous, that we need to come in with, no increase in the mill rate if possible because of people's unemployment and pay cuts and the like, and that there isn't room to be adding things that aren't otherwise already in the budget. So therefore, that what needs to happen here is that whatever increases that occur, like minimum wage, ought to be covered by fees, and that anything that gets moved into the Board of Selectmen has to be covered by cuts elsewhere in the Board of Selectmen. And I will tell you that I've heard from at least 2 of them that said, and if that means you have to cut skating, you cut skating.
Okay, that's fine.
No, so I would add to that. I would add to.
Sorry, go ahead, Art.
Well, just additional perspective is if the town is not going to cut salaries and benefits, then we need to see program elimination or program cuts, which is, the Board of Finance is hearing angry people saying, don't you dare raise my taxes this year. That's a 0. And they are they're taking a lot of flack, and their patience for increases is not there. So I think if we're not going to cut salaries and benefits for town employees, we're going to have to eliminate some programs. That's what I'm hearing.
I appreciate. I think. Listen, believe me, I am actually there as well. That this year is going to be so. That's the very interesting thing, and I appreciate you guys hanging in there with me. I need your help. We're collectively coming at this in a very difficult year. So I think if I could ask my question, absent 2020, we hit the reset button. 2020 is no different than 19 or 2021. What would be, what is the tenor of the board's direction of how to solve this? So because the problem isn't going to go away in 2000 without COVID. The problem doesn't go away. It's still there, and it's just largely dependent about how good or bad of season we have. So I'm understanding philosophically, what would be the Board of Finance's direction of how to deal with this? Would it be as is, general fund, tax increase, program cut? What is the? Because I think it's unfair. Because we have to think about this as if the COVID wasn't here, because it's about correcting an accounting philosophy that has occurred for years outside of the dynamics that we're dealing with as an economy, which is what the charge of this group was to evolve.
Chris, this is Sean. Clearly, there is a disconnect between the Board of Finance and the rest of us in that we went into this with the assumption that we were going to correct this and figure out the right funding scenario. That was the charge. That was what I was told when I was slammed down 2 years ago by the Board of Finance for trying to change the accounting, is that we get back in the room and do this. So clearly that landscape has changed, and forgive me, but this effort appears to be futile in that there is no tolerance at the Board of Finance level for the accounting change at this point without the requisite cuts. So it's got to be done through the context of the Board of Selectmen budget. And clearly this group is not going to be able to solve it. Because if the Board of Finance isn't willing to consider this as part of the guidance and candidly over and above to Linda's comments earlier, we all share in this together, and that in fact is not the consensus from the Board of Finance, then we aren't going to solve this through the working together solution. It's going to be on the Board of Finance or Selectmen's budget to solve independently. And candidly, my answer is going to be, we'll leave it the way it is, and you can go ahead and transfer it year end for the shortfalls. Is what I'm going to recommend based on what I just heard, that the Board of Finance has no tolerance for correcting this problem at this point. So,
well, I would
give everybody a lot of time
I'm being ever the optimist. I still think that, in any problem, and this is just me talking, that if, you all ante up something that, and you all, make a good faith effort to put what you can on the table, that's the way to go. And so, I don't know that in fact, I have my doubts that, I could get the Board of Finance to change the collection rate, but similar. I think that if that's part of the solution you want to put on the table, put it on the table. But you have to also put on the table that the fees will increase and the Board of Selectmen will make some cuts elsewhere to help absorb some of the costs that would be transferred to them. It has to be a tripartite approach. If the only part of it is we're going to transfer everything and we would expect taxes to go up to cover whatever isn't covered by the Board of Finance increasing the collection rate, that's never going to fly.
Yeah, and cutting police officers and plow drivers wasn't ever part of this conversation, Linda. So now that that's it, we need to move this into the normal budgetary process, because I'm not prepared to speak about that.
No, nobody proposed that.
Well, essentially what you just said. If the Board of Selectmen has to cut somewhere else, those are the two places to cut, either library hours, plow drivers, police officers. Those are the services we provide. So if we're
those aren't the only services. Those aren't the only services. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask for again, I apologize, but rudimentary question. So if to change the counting that is occurring in the very black and white, make a very black and white change to actually move this back away from the way it's accounted for now. If we do nothing else, folks, we do nothing. We don't raise costs, we don't raise user fees, and we don't make cuts anywhere else. It would automatically result in to cover the cost, it would result in a tax increase. Is that correct? Is that a very safe basic?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So I again, I want to say that is what I am in favor of. I am not in favor of the tax increase. Not whatsoever. I'm not saying that. Please make sure I don't correct the minutes. What I'm saying is, I think we have to acknowledge that there's only really two scenarios. It's either this group either leaves things. Again, I apologize if I'm missing something. We either leave things as they are,
Yep.
or we move things, which would immediately, if no other changes were made, would result in a tax increase. Is that
That's correct.
a correct?
That's
So-
correct.
I think so.
Okay, so then I appreciate you letting me just talk to this at a very basic level. But that is essentially the decision that this group is charged with, I think, and that how are we going to change the dynamic of this? Do we continue as is, or do we change it to I hope I have a consensus here, is that we move it to a function where it's more appropriately accounted for versus every year just having this expectation we can just cover the cost without really addressing what the systemic issue is behind why do we have these additional costs every year. And I think we need to move in that. I think we need to, Sean, I think my preference is we just make the very hard decision and not spend a ton more time of meetings, and either this work group says it stays as it is, or we make the recommendation that moves back into the general fund, and then we have the discussions with the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance about how to solve that. But that this group makes a recommendation, and the recommendation may be for naught, and it may be dead on arrival. But I don't think we can continue. I think we have to make the difficult recommendation that just because nobody wants to face the inevitable about either a tax cut or program cuts, the inevitable of a tax increase or program cuts, because nobody wants to face that inevitable, very difficult conversation. I just don't want us to have this group. My philosophy is, my opinion, that we just say, screw it. We're just going to leave things as is, so we don't have to face that very difficult conversation. I think that has to happen. Otherwise, we're not, in my opinion, we aren't, this group hasn't done what it's supposed to have done. And
Sean, can I make a motion?
Yep.
I'd like to make a motion that we move the special revenue fund exclusive of the golf course back to the general fund and allow the golf course to operate as a special revenue fund.
That motion's on the table. There's a second. Is there any discussion on that? And just for clarity purposes, Jerry, are you reflecting scenario 2?
I am.
So in our packets, we have scenario 2.
Yeah, this.
Wait a minute,
solution to all this
that's not
discussion is
scenario
make a decision and move it forward.
Wait a minute. I don't think that is scenario 2. Scenario 2 doesn't say moving all of the skating rink and all of the pool. That's what Jerry's talking about.
No, you're
right,
talking.
Jerry?
You're talking about the financial spreadsheet. We had earlier on I think in your packet earlier there were outlines. One of which was
okay. It's not the scenario 2 in today's packet. Okay.
Correct.
Too many scenario 2s.
Yeah, and Melissa, do we have that just to show everybody what we're voting on? It's a prior packet. It was the recommendations from staff when we originally came into this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me just figure that out.
I will say while Melissa pulls that up, I fully support what Jerry's proposing. I was waiting for an opportunity to say the same thing. If we continue to have the golf course subsidize the remainder of the fund, you're just exacerbating the problem over the next couple of years. You're hiding the warts of what this whole thing is. And the golf course, if you're asking it to operate as a business, as you have for the last 30 years, it should be allowed to do so and not subsidize other portions of the fund. This is, if nothing else comes out of this should be the bare minimum that we look to do going forward for the next couple of years.
And just to add on to stall for time while we're getting the scenario, thank you, Tom, for those comments. Again, I think we've had a noble effort here. We've had a strong philosophical debate. I think we've got some really good numbers. that will give the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance a lot of information to consider this within the context of the entirety of the budget. But I think the point is right, that we move it back up to the macro level of either the accounting change or as is really what we're talking about here. And then it's up to the 12 of us, of course, with the voters to decide how to fund it and to deal with it as part of the budgetary context is essentially what I believe the.
Yeah, Sean, if we move forward this way, I think then it becomes a function of you as a Board of Selectmen making a decision. Okay, you're going to go to the Board of Finance and say, we need a tax increase, or Parks and Rec, you're going to have to cut out the following services to meet the financial numbers so that there is no tax increase.
Yep. So Jerry, we have it up on the screen. I don't know if you can see it, but it's the accounting approach 1C. So
correct.
Give you an opportunity to amend your motion if you want to.
Okay. In terms of, we're talking about, I'd like to make a motion that we change the accounting approach, that all expenses and revenues except for the golf course are moved to the general fund and the golf course remains a special revenue fund.
And then Dave, do you second that amended motion?
Yes, I second that amendment.
All right.
Could you explain what the numbers are then? It's not clear to me as to what the resulting numbers are from that motion.
So it's the prior analysis, Art, and again, this is where some of the debate is. But essentially, all of the expenditures that are currently in the special revenue fund associated with golf, associated with pool and associated with rink, will transfer over.
And rec programs as well.
And rec
Other rec.
programs. So basically, every expenditure exclusive of golf will transfer to the general fund as a line item expenditure. The revenues will move to the revenue column as part of the $100 million that we collect. And then there needs to be an accounting done to offset those, but they're no longer segmented off in a special fund.
So what is the number over 180,000 that we would be adding in here?
Into the Board of Selectmen budget.
Brass tacks, I believe I
think it's 126,000 somewhere over and above the 180.
Well, isn't that right where we are? It's 127.9 right now.
Yep,
so
the numbers are somewhat meaningless, Art. It's a philosophical thing of do we put this all back upon the taxpayers as opposed to having the users subsidize?
And so what happens then with the looking at this week's package? If you only are moving the pool and the rink, are you also moving the salary and benefits of the recreation supervisor, the 70% of salaries of the administrator, of Tom,
You're moving
and the secretary?
everything.
Yes.
So all of that. So it's greater than the total number is greater than the 514,000 in scenario 2 of today.
No.
Wait, so you're going to move everything that's in this scenario 2 plus the pool plus the rink, and it's not greater?
The thing that you're not looking at in this scenario is all the revenues being generated.
So Linda, you're correct. The expenditures are greater than that. Yes, they're 1.5 million ish, whatever it is. I believe whatever it is. But there's a corresponding revenue offset that brings that number down to the 514 minus the general fund contribution, et cetera. Yes,
correct.
So when we get into this, there's all these accountings that we have to do to account for, and that's where we've been debating: is it 334? Is it 514? Is it 266?
But the pool and the rink lose money every year, right? So well, then why are you saying that the golf is subsidized?
Because it's all of the overhead for the facility and the salaries, but the pool and the rink don't lose money.
Oh, okay.
It's the stuff in the middle, which is what we've been debating, the philosophical.
It's what the users have been subsidizing the taxpayers for.
There's golf, there's pool, there's rink, and then there's admin. There's 4 buckets, but we only look at them as 3. We need to look at them as 4 is the philosophical discussion here.
Correct.
And the users have been subsidizing bucket 4, and people have been thinking about it as if they're in one of the 3 buckets, and they're not.
John, if I go back to finance and somebody said, what was the expenditure, the taxpayer expenditure in 2019, And what will it be under this new plan that you've brought to us? What are those two numbers?
It's going to be the same. Because right now we're coming from two buckets, one up front and one back end. So the taxpayers are still paying both.
Well, but no, that's not how the mill rate is calculated. The back end stuff doesn't go into the mill rate.
Well,
That's
the
the
mill rate
problem.
ends up producing, after you got your revenues and everything, you end up with a surplus, correct?
Correct. And unless you change the collection rate assumption,
But what I'm saying is
what
the taxpayers are paying for it because you're taking it away from the reserves.
So
but it
let me
doesn't.
clarify here, guys. Going forward, Linda, you're correct. Going backwards, Jerry, you're correct. Because the Board of Finance moved money to offset this, there
Right,
is
it's from taxpayer funds, but it's not in the mill. It's not built into the mill rate.
no. The original expenditures and the original revenues are. We didn't budget for a loss. There's no budget anywhere for a loss. The loss, the fund was supposed to be balanced based on the revenues we thought we were going to get versus the expenditures. The resulting change was a loss, which was then covered by reserves.
Right.
So had we done it the same way, we would have given you 2.3 million in revenue and we would have given you 2.3 million in expenditures, and there would have been no offset needed from a reserve change.
Correct.
What I'm telling you is that's not the correct way to budget going forward, because we have
It's a fantasy.
we have these known costs that are then being made up for by a reserve transfer at the end due to weather, due to rates, because it's a subjective business model in that we don't know what's going to happen. We do our best to predict it, but then life happens and there has been shortfalls as a result of it. So Art, to answer your question, going forward, there's going to be somewhere between a 250 and a probably $350,000, $400,000 hole that we have to figure out and debate through the budget process and decide who eats it and how we eat it. Do the taxpayers? Does the guidance from the Board of Finance through the collection rate? Do the rates that we have to change? And you have agreement from the Board of Selectmen and the Culture, Parks and Rec team to do our best to look at the rates and to certainly look at all expenditures within our budget to make sure that we're trimming where we should and where we can and where we're enhancing rates. But to Linda's point earlier, we need the Board of Finance to decide whether they're going to contribute and either A, let it pass us through as a tax rate, or B, use a collection rate change to make up whatever the delta is.
So Sean, the Board of Selectmen would take that 250 to 400 hole and figure out what to do with it and make a presentation to the Board of Finance? Is that accurate?
Yes, we're going to have to. And the answer might be, we don't have a way to fill it. We need your help, is what I'm saying preemptively. Because if in the spirit of all three boards contributing, that's what we had talked about here originally. If the Board of Finance turns around and says, sorry, Board of Selectmen, you need to fill it entirely, then the Board of Selectmen will have that conversation and report back to you as appropriate.
Sean, you're spot on.
So that is, we have a motion.
Yeah.
We have a
can
second.
vote
We
on the
have,
motion, please.
is there any other discussion? All those in favor, please signify by
Aye.
saying aye.
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 Are there any?
Chris says aye.
I have 4 ayes, I believe. Any opposed?
I wish I could be in favor. But I know that larger number of the 514 is not going to be well received. So I'm going to vote no.
That's how I come out. I'm sorry.
Nothing to be sorry for. It's again, I'm not trying to force anybody's hand here, but we've got to move forward with as much consensus as we have. There's a lot of work.
My point here is that we move forward. It's not that's my point, that we have to evolve this to understand, because I'm not clear where your comrades are. That's not but and I'm not
none of us are.
And I'm not clear where my comrades are. But I need clarity out of action. So this, for me, this is partly just process based, which Sean knows how much I hate process. But I think we need to move forward so we understand what we're facing and how can we, if possible, collectively solve it. So
Okay.
And can I make an alternative second proposal? I know you've voted on one proposal, but can you have a backup? Which would be that we take the $307,000 figure that Amy figured out, or whatever that turns out to be once she does her additional math, and out of the scenario 2 that's proposed here, pick $307,000 worth of that stuff and move that to the Board of Selectmen budget.
And Linda,
so
can I just comment on that before we make a motion? Is the fact that it doesn't solve the long-term problem. It's a stopgap.
Right, wrong, or otherwise, Linda,
It is a stop.
Your guidance is fair. I think the Board of Selectmen will need to consider that once we sit down and have the tri-board meeting and try to digest the entirety of the number. That very well may be where we end up. But
right, and so that's my suggestion, is that you have as a back pocket, hey, Board of Finance, this is what we really want. But if you can't get it from the Board of Finance, okay, the second best solution is to do this. Because yes, Jerry's right, it doesn't solve the whole problem as you guys define it, but it moves the needle a bit. It
Correct.
gives you half a loaf, and half a loaf is better than no loaf.
100%. I'm not asking for all or nothing here, but I think that this group was charged with giving advice to the 3 boards on solving the problem as best we could.
Mm-hmm.
So I think our work is done in that case, but duly noted that this is not necessarily where we're going to end up in May from a budgetary standpoint. I fully appreciate that, and we've got a lot of work ahead of us, and your suggestion might be the one. There'll probably be 6 others that we come up with as well, Linda, and I just don't know what at this point.
Okay.
But as far as this body is concerned, we have made our recommendation. It's okay that there's not unanimous consent here. I think there's a lot of good discussion. I think it's uncovered a lot of important issues. I think we've educated each other, and we can use this information, regardless of what we all think about how to solve the problem, to solve the problem as best we can within the context of everything else, the $100 million that you and Art are faced with, and that the taxpayers ultimately have to decide. So I appreciate everybody's thoughts, time. I know this has been a challenge for folks, but again, I feel good about where we are because we had a lot of important discussions and got a lot of information out that needed to come out and not bog down budget meetings or other meetings. It was important to do that in this venue. So we do not have an additional next steps. This board is considered to have run its course. At this point, we'll put together that recommendation and forward it on to the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance for the tri-board meeting. And I appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you for your leadership, Sean.
Thank you guys all for your participation.
Sean.
Adjourn.
Thanks, everyone.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, take care. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
All in favor. Goodbye. Thanks,
Enjoy,
guys.
Linda.